Mario and leaping are two inseparable aspects of Nintendo's most iconic franchise. For over 35 years now, the plumber has been hopping his way through the Mushroom Kingdom, but you may have not realized just how impressive his leaping ability actually is. According to Mario's life-size models, he is about 5 feet tall. Now people have used that measurement and measured the pixels in his vertical leap from the original Mario Bros. Game on the NES, and it turns out Mario has an estimated 27-foot vertical leap. According to the Guinness Book of World Records, the highest standing jump in human history is at 65 inches, which means Mario's jump is more than 5 times the height of the world's greatest human leap. Pretty impressive stuff coming from a small plumber. Speaking of leaping, Mario may be the most famously associated character with jumping, but it technically wasn't his game that introduced the ability to jump in video games. In fact, it was actually Donkey Kong's game in 1981, although it kinda still was Mario doing the jumping, but at that point, he was only known by the name Jumpman, which is pretty self-explanatory. There have been many different enemies throughout the history of Zelda games, some of which have stood the test of time and are frequently reappearing in newer titles. With that being said, one familiar enemy has a special claim that no other Zelda enemy has. Recognize these guys? These are STALFOS, and these skeletal baddies are the only enemy in Zelda history that has appeared in every single Zelda game since the release of the original. Likes can't say that, Wizrobes can't say that, and even Ganon himself hasn't been in every single Zelda game. The NES Zapper was an accessory for the original Nintendo Entertainment System. In North America, this sci-fi looking pistol was used for games like Gunman and of course the incredibly popular Duck Hunt. This handheld zapper has become an iconic image for North American audiences, but Japanese audiences have a much different recollection of the zapper. In Japan, the zapper had a much similar resemblance to an actual firearm, as it had the appearance of a small black revolver, a style that American laws prohibit, as the toy too closely resembles an actual firearm to be legal in the US. Final Fantasy VII is remembered as one of the most influential and great games of video game history, and it was a powerful pillar of the original PlayStation's library. But believe it or not, we nearly got a much different game, as it wasn't initially being developed for the PlayStation. Although the game was released in 1997, development of the game began in 1994, and was originally designed to be a Super Nintendo title. The developers had a huge vision and a tremendous amount of ambition for the project. Due to this, the project experienced all kinds of technical difficulties and delays, but Square was determined not to give up on the original vision for the game, so they eventually decided to move the project to Sony's PlayStation in order to utilize the larger capacity of the CD-ROM format. It's interesting to think about what the game could have looked like on the Super Nintendo, but considering its success and the legacy it's built since the release, I think it goes without saying that the development team are probably satisfied with the finished product. Nintendo once owned the Major League Baseball team, the Seattle Mariners. As many of you know, Nintendo of America has been based in Seattle for many years, and in 1992, former Nintendo president Hiroshi Yamauchi purchased the Mariners for $125 million and called it a goodwill gesture to the city of Seattle. It was a joining of forces that lasted until 2016, when Nintendo sold the majority ownership for $661 million, although Nintendo has still retained 10% ownership to this very day. Considering the fact that Nintendo and Mariners baseball have been united for such a long period of time, I do find it somewhat puzzling that we haven't got more Mario baseball games on their consoles. Remember this? This is the Nintendo GameCube, one of the more underrated consoles of all time. But believe it or not, the GameCube is not actually a cube. Yep, your whole life has been a lie. Its dimensions are actually 5.9 by 4.3 by 6.3 inches, which naturally makes it not a cube. I guess Nintendo GameBox would have been a more accurate name for the console, but that certainly doesn't sound as cool. Unlike movies based on comic books, movies based on video games haven't quite broke through in Hollywood, and are not usually widely accepted as objectively good films. The 1993 Super Mario Bros. Movie is more of the same, as the movie was seen as a critical and financial failure, although it does carry some nostalgic value for some of us. You may have not known this, but the movie was actually the first feature-length film to be based on a video game. So although it may have not been a great representation of the Mario Brothers, at the very least, it was groundbreaking in the film industry. In 1986, The Legend of Zelda made its impressive debut on the NES. This was the beautiful beginning of what has become one of the greatest and most recognizable video game franchises of all time. Not only was this game pivotal for the history of Zelda and Nintendo, but it was actually a pioneer for the gaming world as a whole, as Zelda was the very first console game that allowed you to save your progress. Imagining a video game universe without this feature is a pretty depressing thought, so it's just another thing for us to appreciate about this majestic franchise. Nintendo devices are well known for their incredible longevity and durability. For example, after 30 years, my frequently used Super Nintendo still works like a charm. And I remember the X-Play show dropping a Nintendo GameCube from great heights, and then beating it with a sledgehammer, and it still booted up without issues. But this next Nintendo device takes the durability contest to another level entirely. This 1989 Game Boy displayed on the screen survived a bombing during the Gulf War in 1990. Fortunately, other than the Game Boy, there were no casualties in the specific bombing. The medic who owned the Game Boy sent it to Nintendo for repair, and Nintendo technicians decided to test it with a cartridge of Tetris. And it actually worked. The Game Boy is currently being displayed at the Nintendo store in New York City, and believe it or not, it still works to this very day, albeit with a few button and display issues. Star Fox 64 is known as one of the great classics of Nintendo's library, but it was actually a bigger influence in the immersive video game experience than many of you may have realized, as it was the game that introduced the rumble feature on the player's controller. The Nintendo 64 Rumble Pack was an external device that plugged into the back of the Nintendo 64's controller, and it was released in a bundle package with Star Fox 64, which received a tremendous amount of praise for increasing the sense of immersion within the game. Nowadays, it's a feature that's simply taken for granted, as most games allow you to simply turn it on and off within the options menu. But I personally remember the first time I experienced the rumble feature on Star Fox 64, and I was laughing hysterically every time I took damage and experienced the unique and brand new sensation. Super Metroid for the Super Nintendo is recognized as one of the greatest video games of all time, and within the game were a variety of bosses who become iconic to the gaming community as time has gone on. But what some of you guys may not know is that these bosses had a unique and familiar sound that came from outside the Metroid universe. So essentially, Nintendo wasn't satisfied with the sounds from the bosses on the original Metroid game on the NES. So instead of reusing them, they decided to pull sounds from a creature who was massive and intimidating. And they went about as massive and intimidating as it gets, as they used sound samples from the King of the Monsters himself from the various Godzilla movies. Which one of these facts was the most interesting? And do you have any cool Nintendo facts to share with the rest of us? Let me know in the comments section below. Thanks for watching as always, make sure to like and subscribe for more Nintendo content, and I'll see you guys in the next video.